and there are a few notable cases. But I think that, for example, and this is something that most people kind of cringe when they hear me say this story, but the very famous UFO landing at Rendlesham Forest, Mintwaters, back in 1980, I believe it was, and we have a number of officers who were there who are on our team. What really happened, it was a black onyx pyramid-shaped craft that set down, left all kinds of physical traces that the British Ministry of Defense have now admitted. But there were these luminous beings that came out through the side of it. And they were actually us as extraterrestrials from 500,000 years in the future.
Oh, wow.
Coming back to warn us of the dangers of nuclear war, because at that time this was a secret nuclear base, and if the knowledge of that had gotten out, it could have really destabilized the Cold War. And what was interesting is that people say, well, then they weren't ET. I said, yes, they were, but they were humans who had gone from Earth around the cosmos 500,000 years into the future and then time traveled back. So events like that have happened. It's not every day, but it does happen. So that's another thing to throw into this whole mix of the sort of plasticity of time and space, that it's not as fixed and linear as people think it is.
Another question, who is in control of the Earth? Is there like an Illuminati-type group that calls the shots?
Well, as I mentioned, the so-called Majestic Group that deals with these issues and a number of others, it's about 200 or 300 people on a committee. I don't call them the Illuminati at all.
Committee of 300.
And I think a lot of people say, oh, it's the Bilderbergers, it's this one, it's CFR. I said, no. You know, I've met with people in those groups. Most of them come to me to find out what's going on. Okay, so the reality is that the group that deals with these really advanced sciences and issues is a very select group. This group is extremely well controlled, that make policy on this. But again, it isn't a monolith. It's not as if it's actually in very dynamic flux. And one of the things I say to people is that if the people would rise up and move forward on this issue, it would bring more of them along. The other point I make is that people through meditation and prayer can alter that as well. And you know, even as a scientist, I absolutely have seen the sort of amazing things that happen when consciousness kicks in along with science. And so I think that people have to understand that it's not like it's some all-powerful group, and you have to understand the universal mind trumps any kind of little clique of people running around with their boots. So I think that, you know, the people get very intimidated by that. And yes, there are very powerful people who have done very ruthless things. And, you know, I mean, Bill Colby, a former CIA director, was going to hand off to my team one of these free energy devices and $50 million to try to get it initially out to the public. And the week he was going to meet with a member of my board, they found him floating down the Potomac River, and he was definitely assassinated.
Good
and
grief.
Yeah, that's true. And the thing is that it's not like this is not a force to be reckoned with, but it's not an omnipotent force. And people, on the one hand, I'm not going to say it's a paper tiger. On the other hand, I think people shouldn't give it more power than it deserves. And I think that people coming together in a higher state of consciousness has a lot more power than they give themselves credit for. And I think that's something that people have to snap out of, is this idea that, you know, poor little us, we can't do anything. Well, in reality, that's what they want you to believe. And that's what you need to snap out of and wake up from.
What are your thoughts on the moons? It's funny. We had one guest who said that the moon was hollow. Our moon was hollow, and actually a spaceship which had been dug out, and that's why you see all the dirt all around it, because it was actually dug out. And then a few months later, I think it was Richard Hoagland that said Phobos is most likely hollow and a spaceship.
Yeah, there are many people, including some Russian cosmonauts that I had met with back in the mid-'90s, who have told me that Phobos wasn't most likely not solid and may in fact been a very, very ancient artificial satellite. Whether our moon is or not, I honestly don't know. I do know that there are ancient structures on the moon, our moon, as well as ones that look newer. And I know that when we were doing the lunar orbiter mapping of the moon before we landed on the moon in 1969, that we have more than one Disclosure Project witness who have seen those pictures of structures that were in the what's called the terminator area of the moon, but the area between the dark and the light side of the moon, and that these were very large structures, and that some of them were very ancient, some of them looked newer, and this was, of course, would have been in the mid to late 60s when we were doing the lunar orbiter that was mapping the moon prior to the landing. And this one gentleman, Wolf, who's on our team and is one of our Disclosure Project witnesses, actually saw these images when he was at a National Security Agency processing facility at Langley Air Force Base. And I think that what people have to understand is that part of that it built into why we were prepared when we did do the moon landing in 1969 with Neil Armstrong. They had prepared some film footage to download in case there were extraterrestrial vehicles zooming around. And in fact, there were. And they did not want the public to see that, so they spliced in this fake footage, which is why a lot of people think we never went to the moon. We did go to the moon. It's just that the footage, not all of it, is actually what happened.
I agree. I totally agree. I always find that the truth lies right in the middle. And
Yep.
yeah.
Well, I'm not speculating because I've actually spoken to the scientists who dealt with that, and as I mentioned, literally very close members of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin's family have confirmed this to me.
If time, did you ask the one about time travel? Okay. Let's see. I don't know what this question's supposed to be, but it says 9/11 rocket, the disclosure regarding the 2001 National Press Conference a couple months earlier. Does he think the momentum has been regained?
Yes, I know what they're asking about. There was a tragic sort of confluence. The National Press Conference that we did for the disclosureproject.org was on May 9th, 2001. September 11th, just a couple months later, was 9/11. Okay, and one of the things that happened is that as we unfolded the Disclosure Project, there were many, many members of Congress that were inquiring and were moving in the direction of a hearing on this issue, an open hearing. And when 9/11 happened, all eyes dropped off that ball onto this terrorist threat. Now, that was terribly convenient. Now, I can't prove that 9/11 happened because this other issue was about to come out of the sack. I do know that it was a very odd coincidence. Now, certainly, the momentum never was dissipated in reality because the momentum is happening to mass consciousness. If you look at what's happened in the last 8 or 9 years, the French Space Agency has released 100,000 pages of previously classified documents. Denmark has, Chile has, Mexico had a press conference where they had their pilots showing footage of ET craft they were pursuing or that was pursuing them. You have the British Ministry of Defense releasing thousands of documents. There's really been a lot, and in fact the word disclosure has become a buzzword used in the mainstream media and everywhere else. So that sort of, I hate to use the word branding of it, or the sort of concept of it, really has never slowed down. Now, I have to say the official response from Congress was thwarted by that. And because they were so overwhelmed with the fact that we had, the Twin Towers collapsing and the Pentagon in Washington being attacked, that they of course snapped. And that's, whether that was planned or whether that was a very unfortunate coincidence, I can't prove.
Okay.
Any more questions, Cherie?
No, I don't think we have any more, but
I have dozens and dozens more, but I don't want to keep back over here until 6 in the morning.
Well, look, I hope to see you guys in Arizona in October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and people can find out at cseti.org about that, cseti.org, and we're going to go out every night under the stars and practice these contact protocols, and God only knows what will happen. And then every afternoon we're going to be hearing from Richard C. Hoagland and Colin Andrews and Dr. Loder and myself. So it'll be a fun gathering, and I hope some of you folks can make it there with us.
Wonderful. And your websites one more time, please?
It's thedisclosureproject.org and also cseti.org, cseti.org, and that's where you can get the registration information for the conference in Arizona, and also the Joshua Tree week-long expedition we're going to do up in the Joshua Tree National Park in November.
Excellent. You've been an absolutely amazing guest. We really, really appreciate your time, sir.
Really.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your interest.
You have a great evening.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And ladies
Bye-bye.
and gentlemen, that was Dr. Stephen Greer of the Disclosure Project. Absolutely fascinating guest. I could talk to him for hours and hours. He was giving me goosebumps the entire broadcast.